Hey, it's Lara, back with another weekly astrology forecast. This one is for the week of May 13th to 19th, 2020. But like many of the videos that I've been doing lately, this one covers not just this week because there's some big stuff going on, throughout 2020, right? There's some big stuff going on that is not just impacting a moment in time or 2 days or 3 days or a week kind of thing. So we're going to talk about that in the video today. And before I do that, I hope you're well. Thanks for being here. I hope if this is your first time here that you know, if you resonate with what I'm saying, then let me know. And you can do that by subscribing to the channel, hitting the like button, leaving me a message, a comment, that kind of thing. I do appreciate it. So we are in a place where, whoever thought we'd be here? Whoever thought in your lifetime that this would be happening, right? And just when you think it can't get any kind of weirder or more uncertain, we're hitting this period of huge retrograde energy and some big shifts. And so, when I was trying to get a handle on kind of how to best articulate this, right? And how to translate sort of the energy into a picture or an image or something like that for you that would make sense. Because there's just so much going on. A couple of things came to mind. One was sort of being adrift, in an old ship sort of thing, and we are, an old wooden ship, and we're on the ocean, and a big storm comes out of nowhere, and we're tossing and turning, and we don't know which end is up, and it's hard to imagine how it's going to end, and we are drawing on blind faith and our courage and our instincts and our connection to a higher power, whatever that might be for us. And then in the distance, we see a lighthouse, right? And it may sort of flash in and out of sight, but we know it's there. And so we kind of focus on trying to orient ourselves to the lighthouse. So that's one sort of image that came to mind. And the other one was, we are all Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz right now. If you haven't seen that movie, it might be a good time to watch it, or a good time to revisit it if you have. But, if you know the story, we're not in Kansas anymore, are we? Dorothy, she goes through all these crazy adventures that she never could have imagined, and encounters all these different characters, and she meets different parts of herself as well, right? And I mean, we could do a whole video on this alone, but ultimately what happens is she wakes up and realizes that all this kooky adventure was just a dream, or was it, right? But whatever the case may be, she wakes up a different person. She wakes up from the dream a different person than she was before. And before she goes home, Glinda, the good witch, says to her, you know, you had the power all along, my dear. You know, you had the power to go home all along. You just needed to realize it in yourself. You needed to recognize it in yourself. I'm paraphrasing. I haven't seen the movie in a long time, but from what I remember, right? And she kind of realizes that, you know, she says something about if she's ever looking for her heart's desire, again, then she doesn't have to go any further than her backyard, because if she doesn't find it there, she knows she hasn't really lost it, sort of thing. It's within, right? So something along those lines. So my point is we're kind of there. We're kind of in this crazy whirlwind, you know, follow the yellow brick road. Who knows where it's going to lead, encountering all these different, you know, entities on the way, and people and characters and experiences. And in the end, we have the opportunity to wake up from the dream a different person. And we may realize, you know, really that we had that in us all along, right? And so this is a time we're in, and one of the things I'm going to talk about in this video in more detail is the Venus retrograde, which is really about connecting to our heart's desires in a way. I did a video back in mid-April when Venus initially moved into Gemini, and I spoke a bit about this, and I spoke a bit about the retrograde. But as I was looking at it, I thought this is more significant than I gave it credit for then, I think, and also there's another piece of the puzzle that I want to bring in to play here in this video. So I'm going to do that for you. So we are going to focus on that. We're going to talk about, just in brief, all of the other things that are going on. And we'll start with where's the moon at, right? Because this is our sort of day-to-day touchstone, the moon. I think I have cats trying to enter or leave the room right now. Anyway, so the moon is currently in Aquarius as I'm recording this, and she will enter Pisces on Friday and then move into Aries on Sunday. So, you know, if you've got something to do that requires some activity, some action, some drive, some physical sort of, you know, expenditure, then Sunday might be the day to do that if you're planning on doing it on the weekend. So, and for those of you who are new here and haven't heard me say this before, I have this freebie over on my website. It's called A Guide to Working with the Moon, and it helps you connect with the moon energy and understand the how to work with that, you know, how to begin working with that, and so that we are working more in tune with the natural ebbs and flows, rather than trying to work against them, right? And so that we're more aware of those things. So the link to that is below. So that's where the moon is at. We had on Monday, Mercury officially entered Gemini. So Mercury's there with the North Node, right? And with Venus, and also with Vesta, that I'm going to bring into the conversation in a little bit here. And then we also have, well, we had Saturn station retrograde last week. I did a video on that last week. And we had last week or the week before, I can't remember. And then Pluto is also now retrograde as of sometime in April. Can't remember the date. And then also, along with Venus stationing retrograde today, the 13th, well, tomorrow, Jupiter is joining the retrograde party, Jupiter in Capricorn. And so let's just touch on that briefly, because I'm going to focus on the Venus piece mostly in this video. So I'll just talk about Jupiter first, which is happening tomorrow. So May 14th, Jupiter is stationing retrograde in Capricorn at 27 degrees of Capricorn. I'll show you this on the chart in a minute. And we'll be there until September 12th, all the way back to 17 degrees of Capricorn. in retrograde. And so, this Jupiter retrograde happens every year, every 12 or 13 months for about 4 months at a time. And it depends, like it's not always, obviously not always retrograde in the same sign, right? So the last time Jupiter was retrograde in Capricorn specifically was in 2008. So what happened in 2008 for you in relation to the Capricorn area of your chart, whatever house Capricorn sits for you, right? On a collective level, there was an economic crisis when Jupiter was in retrograde in Capricorn. Jupiter doesn't love being in Capricorn. It's considered in its fall in Capricorn because it can't do what it's sort of innately meant to do as well in Capricorn, right? It's a benefic. It's considered a benefic that brings good things, that brings abundance and expansion. And Capricorn is more about restriction and boundaries and rules, right? Ruled by Saturn. So like with any planet stationing retrograde and moving in retrograde motion, this is about a more of an inward turning of the energy. Retrogrades are about reflecting, reviewing, integrating, things that have happened on an external level. And now we're bringing those learnings inward, and it's like, those teachings and sort of reflecting on all of that and on the lessons and like, where do we go from here? And, what needs to be integrated, and it's that inward turning. And so in the case of Jupiter, it is about really going inward, in terms of, our inner, it's about inner growth, right? Jupiter's about growth and expansion. So this is about inner growth, inner expansion, inner wisdom. And that is ultimately like, Jupiter's kind of asking us to reflect on the big picture. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, big picture, of what's gone on of late, right? In the outside, external world, in our external lives, and to reflect on that. And so that's Jupiter in Capricorn. And I want to spend the rest of the time talking about Venus, but I want to show you the chart first. So here we've got the chart for today. And you can see that, I mentioned to you the moon's in Aquarius. Saturn is in Aquarius, 1 degree. Saturn's retrograde there. Pallas Athena is also in Aquarius and conjunct Saturn, right? So bringing this sort of creative and strategic, thinking in terms of structures and rules and boundaries and like, what are we going to do about all this where we're at right now? So, I just thought I'd bring that into the picture here because we're going to talk about another conjunction between an asteroid, a goddess asteroid, Vesta, and Venus at more length here in this video. But that's what's going on up here in Aquarius. And we also have, there's Jupiter, right, which is not retrograde yet, but will be tomorrow. And there's Pluto, already retrograde, still pretty close to Jupiter there. They're in their on and off conjunction over the course of 2020. And then eventually, right, at the end of 2020 in December, Saturn and Jupiter are going to meet up in the Great Conjunction, right around where Saturn's at right now. And then we have the nodes that have shifted signs into South Node Sagittarius, North Node Gemini. Did a video on that a couple weeks ago, I think. Maybe last week, I can't remember. But so here down in Gemini, we've got North Node, we've got Venus, we've got asteroid Vesta, and we have Mercury now in Gemini as well. And then next week, the sun will join this energy, moving out of Taurus and into Gemini. And I think, and also what I want to point out to you here, well, first of all, here's Mars, which entered Pisces just yesterday, I think, yes. Or maybe Monday. Can't remember. And then Neptune in Pisces as well. And so Neptune is making a square to Venus. And this is like this long, it's happening exact 3 times. I spoke about this in the last video that I did on Venus in Gemini. But it's kind of like this backdrop, this square, Neptune and Venus squaring. And I'll touch on that as well as we go through. But that's the chart. And let's talk about Venus retrograde a little bit more. So Venus is a personal planet, right? So we tend to feel the personal planets more in our sort of day-to-day reality, more on a personal level. And so that's one of the reasons why I want to focus on this. But this is also a, it's significant. I mentioned to you that the nodes of the moon are sort of lined up with this Venus in Gemini signature because Venus will begin a new cycle, a new, roughly 18-month cycle. And the nodes of the moon are also on an 18-month cycle. So this is part of a bigger picture. Venus rules our relationships, including the relationship we have to ourselves. It rules our resources, right? Our money, beauty, aesthetic, art, what we find pleasurable. And ultimately, it's about what we're attracted to. It's that principle of attraction, right? Law of attraction, if you will. Venus is about what we are magnetized to, what we draw to us, what and who, that kind of thing. And when Venus stations retrograde, it's a really good time for reflecting deeply on, reflecting and evaluating and reviewing and getting clear on what we love, what we love, who we love, what we want to attract, what we're attracted to, all of those things, our desires, right? Venus is about what we desire. And it's a really good time for reflecting on our relationship to ourselves when Venus goes retrograde, and to what we hold near and dear to our hearts, to what we hold close to our hearts, to what our hearts desire, to our heart's desires, right? Just like Dorothy. And so, another element here that speaks to our heart's desires is Vesta. That is conjunct Venus in Gemini. Now, Vesta and Venus met up in Gemini earlier. I think it was around the 9th of April, but Venus wasn't retrograde at that time, right? So now she is this time. And so Venus, I don't think I gave you the details in terms of degrees and stuff. Venus will retrograde at 5 degrees of Gemini, and that happens today on May 13th. And then she will go back to 21 degrees of Gemini, where she will station direct on June 25th. So this is going on for a while, and it's those degrees. So if you have planets, significant points, angles between those degrees, 5 degrees and 21 of Gemini, or the mutable signs, right? The other mutable signs are Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces. Then this Venus retrograde is going to have a more obvious impact on you. And but it's retrograding for all of us in the Gemini area of our chart, right? And I'm going to get to that in a bit. So what happens when Venus goes retrograde is she becomes invisible. This is a roughly 40-day, 40-night journey that Venus takes to the underworld. That's what the ancients thought, right? And so she was an evening star, visible in the evening. So she will meet the sun and be invisible for roughly 40 days, 42 days. And then when she emerges from the rays of the sun, she will be visible as a morning star. So she will be reborn as the morning star. Venus retrogrades around every 18 months or so, right? And for 42 days at a time. And she is retrograde the least amount of any of the other planets. So only about 7% of the time. And every 8 years, she is retrograde in the same sign. So when was the last time Venus was retrograde in Gemini? That would have been 2012. So you can think back to 2012 around this time and what was transpiring for you, particularly in relation to the house that Gemini sits in your chart. And before that, it would have been May, June of 2004. So you can go back to those two time periods and think back. And I know for me, there were some significant things that went on, very significant things. And so, just briefly to share personal anecdotes. 2012, around this time, I went and I had switched careers. I was 1 year into my job at a local healthcare organization, and rapidly realizing that that was not where I wanted to be for the long haul either. And I was getting a bit of a wake-up call there, and I ended up going and doing a coaching certification. So got my life coaching certification, and I started down a road of doing a lot of online learning and online training, and I connected with a mastermind group, and I eventually in the following year I went to something called the World Domination Summit. And so that was a significant shift for me. That 10th house kind of career area, that's where it sits for me, Gemini, was going on. And then before that, in 2004, when Venus was retrograde, I actually ended up in the hospital. I was pregnant for my first child, for my son, and I ended up in the hospital with complications, some pretty significant complications. And I had I was done with teaching for the year. For my whole mat leave, I had to leave suddenly because I had, an issue, and I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. So that time I was in the hospital for about 6 weeks before my son was born. But during that time, I was in sort of quarantine, right? I was shut away from the world a little bit, on my own for the most part. I mean, I was allowed visitors and stuff, and I did a lot of reflecting and a lot of reading. I didn't have a TV or anything like that in my room. And so there's just a lot of alone time and a lot of faith that everything was going to work out. Actually, I had this inner knowing, and I had some interesting occurrences there, visits from the other side and that sort of thing. But without going down that rabbit hole, it was an interesting time. And so, that's what happened for me. So think back to those years, 2012 and 2004, around this same time frame, and what was going on for you. So the last couple things I want to say here before I dive into talking to speaking to each of the signs is that I mentioned that Venus is making a square to Neptune, right? So 3 times it's happening exact. It happened once already on May 3rd. It'll be exact again on the 27th of May, and then near the end of July. So it's kind of this backdrop, right? And this is something that normally happens for a few days at a time, sort of thing. But now it's this longer term aspect that's playing out over several months. And it's really a time to evaluate again, it's another layer of evaluating the relationship to the self and what you desire. And it may be a time of thinking, about sacrifice and maybe where you've sacrificed too much or not enough rather. Neptune is about sacrifice. But the relationship between Venus and Neptune is interesting because Neptune is considered the higher octave of Venus, right? Whereas Venus is more about love on the physical, material, sort of human plane. Neptune is about universal love. It's about love on the spiritual plane, right? Love and compassion for all of humanity. And it's this love that has no boundaries sort of thing. So it's a good time, like with this square going on. A square is this conversation of tension, right? Something wants to happen. And so it's a good time to reflect on what is the connection or perhaps disconnection between those two concepts, those two ways of looking at love in our lives. Are we looking for love in all the wrong places, right? Are we repeating some patterns that may have a deeper meaning to them? Are we seeking that sort of divine connection? Being connected to a higher power, something more meaningful, something deeper, like a higher love. Are we trying to do that through the wrong avenues, right? Certain people, certain types of people, or through escapism, and sort of like false prophets, if you will, if you know what I mean by that. Ultimately, before we can find, like, you hear a lot of people talking about this concept of, twin flames and this sort of thing these days. Ultimately, before you can find, that right, healthy relationship on the human level, it's about connecting to the divine and the divine within, right? And it's about being in right relationship to yourself, first and foremost. So that's, as I see it, the sort of Cole's notes on Neptune and squaring Venus. I talked, I think, a little bit about this in the last video too, and I probably said some other things. There's always many, many things that could be said. And in a short video like this, I try to pull out sort of what I feel is relevant at the time. And then let's just talk a little bit more about Venus and Vesta in conversation at this time, right? In conjunction. So Vesta entered Gemini, asteroid Vesta entered Gemini on March 22nd, and she will be there until June 3rd, June 4th. Vesta represents, you can look up the mythology if you want yourself, and I've talked about it before here, but just briefly, Vesta represents what is sacred to us, right? It is our inner flame, what we are devoted to, and what we hold as holy, as sacred, maybe what we ritualize as well. And so if you look at where Vesta is in your own chart, you get a sense of this. It will have more meaning to you. It will make more sense to you. So, for example, I have Vesta in my 9th house, Taurus in my 9th house, right? And so what am I devoted to? What do I hold sacred? Well, definitely knowledge, 9th house, higher learning, things like wisdom. And then if you bring the Taurus piece in, pleasure, simple pleasures. I love good food. I love cooking. If you follow me on Facebook and Instagram, you probably know that about me. A connection to the earth, right? in that sort of grounded sense. I like my surroundings to feel comfortable and earthy, that sort of thing. So that's where Vesta is in my chart. Venus Taurus ninth house. So those are the things that I hold sacred, right? They sort of flame my heart's desires, that sort of thing. So if you look at where Vesta is in your own chart, then you can get a sense of that. Right now, Vesta is in Gemini. So collectively, there's a devotion to knowledge, to information, to information exchange, to the processing of information, to learning something new. This idea of beginner's mind is very Gemini. Gemini third house, whereas Sagittarius ninth house is more about the wisdom, right? Gemini is more about the information, the knowledge. Sort of two sides of the same coin. They both have their merits. And so I really see Vesta and Venus coming together in Gemini as investigating deeply, right? Retrograde, what it is that feeds our heart's desires. What are our heart's desires? And I think about a practice that I've recommended to a million people before, and I've done myself, and I actually used to teach workshops on it, and it's Danielle Laporte's desire map, right? Because she takes this idea of goal setting and brings it down to, or brings it to the level of our feelings. How do we want to feel? And so it's kind of this idea. It would be a good practice maybe to do a good book to read or review at this time. But this period that we're in, we may feel a bit lost at sea. We may be a little like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, but what's really rings true, what fans that sacred flame for us? What are our heart's desires? How do we connect with that, right? How do we connect with ourselves and get clear on those things so that when, we wake up from the dream, or when the lighthouse guides us home, so to speak, what do we do then? Right? Like, we're not just going to keep going on the same way that we were, hopefully, before all this transpired, before coronavirus happened, before 2020 happened. We're going to have a better sense of how to move forward in a way that, really feels in alignment with our heart's desires. And something that we can be devoted to. All right, so I will get off the soapbox now, and I'm going to take you through the 12 signs. Keeping in mind, when we're doing these general forecasts, you listen for your rising sign first and foremost. And then your sun and your moon. Of course, if you know your specific birth chart, have a look at your chart and see, okay, what house does between 5 and 21 degrees Gemini fall for me, because that's what we're talking about right here. And like I said, if you have other planets points in that range of the mutable signs, right? Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces. I definitely do. My ascendant's right there. My sun is right there. I got Mars in there or close by. So anyway, we're going to start with Gemini, because Gemini, this is happening in your first house. Venus is retrograding in your first house. You've got the North Node there as well. You got Mercury, your ruling sign, there right now too. And the sun is about to enter your sign. So focus on you right now, Gemini. And really, I'm going to keep this brief, but keep the context of everything I said to you in the introduction, focusing on, what do you want for yourself? First house. What is your connection to yourself, your relationship to yourself? because first house is the self. It's the I, me, mine. It is your physical body, your physical vitality. It speaks to your approach to the world, how you appear to the world, how you come at the world sort of thing, and how the world perceives you. And so what are your heart's desires on that level of the self? And I'm going to leave it at that to keep it very simply. And I'm going to move on to Taurus now. So Taurus, what are your heart's desires, right? This is the time to reflect on that. And in the context of everything that I said in the introduction, but your heart's desires in relation to the second house, which is where Venus is stationing retrograde and where she's in conversation with Vesta. And, she'll square Neptune as well. But so the second house, what do you want in terms of your sense of self-worth, your personal resources, so your time, your money, your energy, how you earn those things, how you expend those things to make a sort of stable place for yourself in the world, and what you value, what you truly value. It's a time for really going deep with those things and connecting to your heart's desires there, getting clear on that. So that's for you, Taurus. Next, we have Aries, where you're being asked right now, what are your heart's desires, right? Venus retrograde in Gemini in relation to communication. This is third house. This is where this is happening for you. Your immediate environment, your community, right? Your the people in your community. So peers, teammates, workmates, cousins, siblings, neighbors, this sort of thing. Also, how you communicate, exchange of information. And we're talking about that level of learning that is at the more sort of beginner level, the basic level, beginner's mind, right? In the third house. And so what are your heart's desires in relation to all of those things, right? It's a time of really reflecting on that and getting clear. So that's for you, Aries. Moving to Pisces, where we're talking about your fourth house, right? Venus retrograde in the fourth, close to Vesta. What are your heart's desires in terms of your home, your family, your place of living? Real estate, your sense of emotional security, your connection to your ancestry and your roots, and the, your lineage sort of thing. And that sort of nurturing mother sense or mother figures in your life, right? So, or you as a mother even. So all of these things, fourth house, home, family, roots sort of thing. This is where you're being asked, what do you really want? What really fans the flame of your heart's desires, right? So keeping in mind the context of everything I said in the introduction, that's for you, Pisces. Moving on to Aquarius. Aquarius, this is all about your fifth house and what you really want in relation to the fifth house. What are your heart's desires in relation to children? Anything you create. So creative self-expression, your creative projects, your children, other people's children you work with. What sparks joy for you? What brings you pleasure in life, right? So these are the things that you're being asked to really reflect on and get clear on what's closest to your heart. What do you truly desire as far as those themes go? So that's for you, Aquarius. Moving to Capricorn. Capricorn, this is about your sixth house. This Venus retrograde in your sixth house is about reflecting on what do you really want in terms of your daily grind, your routines, your work routines. This can be paid or unpaid work, your work tasks. It's about any kind of routines around health and wellness or health and wellness in general. It's about relationships between unequals. So like employee-employer kind of thing, relationships. What do you want your day-to-day life to look like? What can you willingly devote to, right? What is your heart desire in those surrounding those themes, right? And in context of what I said in the introduction. So that's for you, Capricorn. Next, we have Sagittarius, where we're talking about your 7th house. Venus retrograding in the 7th, conjunct Vesta. What do you desire in close personal relationships, right? What can you devote to? What do you want to devote to? What brings you a sense of that sort of heart fire in terms of, close personal relationships? And this can be friends, family, significant other. It can be business relations. It can also have to do with contracts and agreements, right? Those kinds of obligations, and what really, what desires you have there, what feels like it's something you can devote to and you truly want. So that's for you, Sagittarius. Moving to Scorpio next, we've got the Venus retrograde in your 8th house, conjuncting Vesta there. So Scorpio, for you, this is all about what you truly desire, what your heart desires, what fans that inner flame in relation to your intimate connections, right? Intimate relationships, in terms of like going deep into the psyche. And this can be through sort of occult knowledge, right? Or it can be through therapy, connecting intimately with another. It also has to do with resources that you share with other people. Anything like money, time, energy that you share with another, right? Or that come to you through other venues other than what you alone expend in terms of time, money, energy. So that's for you, Scorpio. What do you truly want in that department? And in terms of, I should also say, Scorpio, in terms of this notion of transformation, right? What's fanning the flames there for you? 8th house, it's complicated, it's deep, but all those things apply. Moving on to Libra. Libra, what are your heart's desires in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of your philosophy, your belief system, your, sort of anything revolving around higher learning, whether that be higher education, teaching, publishing, foreign travel, the things that you learn from foreign people and places. Foreign travel is a bit of a, not happening right now, but all those themes are at play here. What does your heart desire? What are you devoted to in terms of all of those themes, those 9th house themes? So that's for you, Libra. And then next we have Virgo. Virgo, for you, this is about your career, your public reputation and persona, your legacy, the public legacy, right? You wish to leave, your relationship to authority, these kinds of things. So for you, Virgo, what feeds the flame there? What does your heart truly desire in that arena? It's time to really go deep there and to get a clear understanding of that by the time we come out of all this retrograde that we're in right now, and the Venus particularly conjunct Vesta, right, in your 10th house. So that's for you, Virgo. And next we have Leo, where we've got this happening in your 11th house, Venus retrograding conjunct Vesta in your 11th. And for you, Leo, what are your heart's desires in terms of your hopes and dreams for the future? What are your heart's desires in terms of the group, the collective? What do you want for the collective? What do you want in terms of friendships, clubs, associations, organizations, these kinds of connections, right? These are the big questions to be asking yourself right now. And what do you want to devote to? Who is devoted to you in those when we're talking about those things, those 11th house themes. So that's for you, Leo. And then last but not least, we have Cancer in this case, where Cancer, this is all about this hidden area of your chart, Venus retrograde in Gemini in the 12th, Conjunct Vesta, which is what are your heart's desires in terms of your connection to spirit, in terms of mental health and wellness, spiritual health, in terms of, maybe involving some kind of sort of institutions or places closed away from the world, behind closed doors. I talk about this sometimes. How do you want the story to end? The 12th house is about endings and closure and letting go and this sort of thing, right? And so what do you really need to let go of or want to let go of? What are your heart's desires as far as all of those things go? So that's for you, Cancer. That's all 12 signs now. And so I hope this was helpful to you. And please let me know how things are going. And, we're all on our own journey here, right? All in this together, but all on our own individual journey. And so keep an eye on that lighthouse. All right, take good care. And I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.